It's metal roofing day. I don't have a ton of metal roof to put on this shade structure, but there are 4 panels that makes it, it's about a 12 by 12 roof. And last episode, I got that timber frame all put together. This week, I'm gonna pin that and get it all completely hardened with its hardware, get the rest of these purlins up so I've got a surface for the metal roof, and then put down that metal roof. And I'll square up the structure. I'll show you how I'll do that. I think this is pretty common roofing practice for like an open barn building or a pole barn or something like that. It's a non-insulated building. I don't have walls. It's a very simple structure. Hopefully you learn a little bit. I know I'll learn something because I'm gonna do the same kind of roofing on the garage that I hope to build next summer or maybe even late this fall. And I'll use those same techniques there. And this is my practice run. So let's get started. I'm getting set up and organized, and I had taken some wood back to the house and run it through the table saw because I wanted to get the angle for the end of the boards that sort of create the fascia and the end cap or the first purlin. And so I had those all cut dimensionally, but not cut down to length. And most of this wood is almost exactly the length I need. I just needed to set up and trim down the edges and square things up. I'm using my handy lithium battery and solar panels to power the saw again, and I had a CAD drawing of this, but I checked the as-built measurement just to make sure it was right. It was actually just exactly right. So I went ahead and prepared to cut these, and they're all going to be the same length, so it's pretty easy to just march through them and cut them out. Because these rafters are pretty tall and I need to wrestle the board up there, I screwed on some little boards underneath, just as little kind of temporary catches for the board so that I could position it up there, get it all centered, and then use some screws to hold it down. All right, so with that fascia board kind of front and back, that completes sort of the framing of the roof. And the last thing I've got to do is put purlins all the way across and deck it. But I haven't really bolted anything together yet. So I'm going to go through each of the joints. I'll just do quickly and secure everything. Now it's just to kind of all pin together. And I'll show you each of those joints one at a time as I go through them and get everything done. And then I'll nail off that fascia. I've just got it secured on both ends right now, on both sides. And that should make the structure pretty darn rigid. I did pull the tape diagonally and both directions, and it was exactly the same. So got really lucky and made it, it's just like dead square. So I don't have to shift it or rack it or do anything before I start nailing things off and securing everything. It should hold that shape. And then certainly when I get the metal down, that'll lock it up. So for now, I'll run around and show you each of those joints. So going from the bottom up, we'll start with the posts that are anchored into the concrete. And these are stainless steel brackets that hold in. They've got 5/8 inch holes, and it's just a through bolt. And I'm using stainless steel hardware here because this is the most exposed part because it's down low in this marine climate when it's going to get wet. Then up above that on each post is a brace that comes across that is it's just sandwiched on there, again with through bolts. So I'm using galvanized bolts in this case, 1/2 inch, and backing up with washers. So drill them out and tighten them up real tight. I'll come back through these in maybe a few months, and if the wood's dried and shrunk at all, I'll tighten everything back up. On the back, I've got my mortised in joints, and they just need to be pinned in place. So I'm using a long lag screw here. I think it's a 6-inch galvanized lag screw, just to pull that joint tight and keep it, the shoulder in there should hold it up with the mortise and tenon, but the bolt will help keep it in check if it's windy and kind of stressing back and forth. So next up was the beam or girder that holds the rafters, and I needed to get longer bolts. I had 6-inch bolts that just barely got through without any washers, and it was enough to hold it, but I came back later with 6.5-inch bolts that work. They're galvanized, hot-dipped galvanized bolts, and I just drilled out 2 holes and ran them through both here on the braces and then at the tops of the posts, and that sort of sandwiches that into the little notches built on the tops of the posts and becomes a really stable joint. So now with all the joints locked in and finalized, I was able to go back and nail off the rafters, into fascia board into the rafters. I used a clamp to kind of get those all trued and nailed it off so that I ended up with a really nice sturdy deck that was all pinned down and bolted up. So the next morning I loaded up the metal material and had a really kind of spectacular foggy morning to work with to get started putting the actual roof on. So that's going to be the purlins, which are already up at the site, and the sheet metal up on top of that. And I had a good day to work with. With the rafters pre-marked and the boards pre-cut, the biggest challenge was just figuring out how to build sort of a working deck to work from up there. I could have placed the ladder up inside each of the rafter bays and done it from the ladder, but it was probably easier to get up on top. And I tried a couple of techniques. One of them worked, one of them didn't. But I started by putting down the bottom board, which sort of wraps over the top of the fascia, and then stacked everything up there and then sort of slid them out and hammered them in place as I went. All right, so that worked out pretty well. The one thing I would do differently, and hopefully you do the first time, having learned this, is I would have set the purlin in the very middle of the span first. The reason being, then I could kind of pull everything in and get it in check. They're a little bit off. They're not quite as flush as I'd like them to be, and I think that's because the rafters are just minimally bowed. It's like 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch, but if you really want to get it right, go to the center of your rafters and run the purlin there first, mark it off, and get everything kind of locked in on that purlin, and then you can just lay the field in with the rest of them. Simple thing, but a good thing to do maybe next time I do this. So the purlins went up, that went pretty well, and I've got the metal sorted out here. I was actually going to do it on the trailer, but the local expert of everything creepy and crawly is pointing out that there's ticks everywhere, and so we've seen them all in the tall grasses. This is kind of beaten down where I'm working, so I feel good here. But last night when the mouse woke us up that was running across our heads, I realized that I had a tick on me, and thankfully it hadn't bitten me or gone in yet, but there are just many out right now, and it's just the time of year because of the tall grasses. I'll work here, and then I'm wearing the gear you typically would want to wear, which is full length thing and good cuffs around your boots and stuff, but just something to think about. So there's 4 pieces of metal. This roofing probably couldn't be any simpler because there's really just one run on it. It's basically a 12 by 12 box up there, and so I have to do a little trimming down, sort through the profiles of there's sort of a low end, a high end, so that's the eave and the gable, I believe, and then the 2 sides, or maybe the gables are the sides, I'm not sure of the terminology, but there's 2 sides and they go in a stack layer. So you want the bottom one first, the roofing goes on top of that, then the sides go on top of that, and then the front top cap goes across all of those. And so I'll do those in order. I'm gonna pre-drill them down here because I think that'll be easier to put up. So spend some time here measuring and kind of sorting out where they're going to hit on the purlins, because those are pretty well measured. And then when I put them up there, all I have to do is just drive them down. So these ticks may be hard to see, but they camp out on the top of a blade of grass waiting for somebody to jump onto. This meadow is used by a bunch of elk and other animals going through, so maybe they have a history here, or maybe it's just the grasses. But it's obviously the time of year for ticks.
Thankfully, they don't move very fast.
While I sort out and figure out the trim pieces, Karen is eradicating the pest population. It seems like metal roofing is a little bit like origami or paper folding, and I do want to thank R&R Buildings, who does a really good job of showing instructional stuff on YouTube about how to do metal roofing, and this isn't necessarily exactly how they would do it, but it taught me kind of how to think about it. And so just doing some little angle cuts to make the end cap for this. This is the tailing piece that's kind of the drip edge. Up next is the main roofing, and I'm just marking off like the spots where I want it to end so that I keep it sort of parallel as I move across the roof. And with only 3 or 4 panels, it's not going to be hard to do, but where there's a bigger roof, I'd want to really hit those marks and keep it from starting to skew as I work my way across. Here I'm just using a regular 1/8" bit, which is about right, to pre-drill the holes. Just the screws are self-driving, but they're kind of hard to get to start. And so by drilling this, it makes it a lot easier. It'll keep my pattern nice and tight. I also switched from my work boots to some running shoes, just figuring I'd have better traction up there and it'd be less likely to damage the metal roof. At first, I thought it was a good idea to put some scrap form wood I had sitting around up on the roof as sort of a temporary deck, but it ended up being not such a good idea because you don't know what's reliable and what's not. So I think if I did this again, I just wouldn't put anything up there and just use the purlins that I know are fastened and fixed. It was sort of a false sense of security to have these boards up here. But it was a good lesson to learn. Then finally, I came up with a way to wrestle the panels up onto the roof. They're not very heavy, but they're just kind of big, and it was just slightly breezy. This would be terrible on a windy day. But I brushed off the panels because I understand that any little metal filings can kind of promote rust and get that started. And so I just sort of scrubbed them off before I put them up, got up on the roof and dragged them up, and then kind of slid them into place and started driving screws in to hold them down. With one panel up, I was able to take a break with my buddy and enjoy lunch under a new shade structure. I worked my way across and then measured out the remainder, and I had just one cut to make all the way up, and I tried 10 snips and got a little ways, didn't work, and so I switched over to an angle grinder, and that made pretty short work of cutting down the panel to size. And it gets overlapped quite a bit by the edge, so it doesn't have to be a super accurate cut. It just needs to lay on the rib where you need it so that the rib is overlapped with the edge. Back to paper folding for a bit. The tails of these side pieces just need a tapered cut, so that one was pretty straightforward. The other end of this side was only slightly more complicated because it needed to kind of fold around the corner. And so I did my folds the best I could with a piece of wood and then sort of hammered those out. And they ended up with a little massaging. They worked out fine. And then those end pieces went up. The final thing was just to put the cap on the top, and the top is just, you just cut it to length, and then it just wraps over the top of the rest of this stuff and secure it down. So that was pretty much it for the trim on the roof. Well, that was pretty cool. So we got all the roof on, everything's tucked in. I just need to replace a couple of those bolts, and I'll do next time I'm up when I've got the proper length of bolts. That went on pretty well. I would give myself, I don't know, B maybe on metal roofing. And the fun part is I learned a whole lot. So that'll make things much, much easier when I go to do it. I guess the only thing I would say is if you've never done metal roofing, all the metal is, when it's got folded corners, is just gonna stay straight. So however you get it started, which means maybe put down one anchor at one end, go to the very middle and pull it tight. So like with these trim pieces, I had to go back and kind of fix that because you can't really, like a piece of wood you can stress and you can bend a little bit, but the metal really doesn't. It's just gonna buckle and do weird things. So it's gotta be all on there straight. And kind of once I had that figured out, it went a lot easier. The next steps here are to do plumbing. We could move the tank today, but I think we'll leave that for the next time because that's gonna be kind of brute force effort and probably some sort of Egyptian pyramid sort of scheme to kind of lift it. It doesn't weigh that much. It weighs about 300 or 400 pounds, but it's certainly kind of big. And if I have the tractor, I may be able to kind of lasso it with rope and pull it around. But we'll skid it up onto here, and then I'll do the plumbing system for it. And remember, we've got the trench from the well up to here, and I can't wait to turn it on and start filling the tank. And then we've got the trench from here down to the cabin, and so we'll see what that pressure looks like once the tank starts to develop some head pressure. So this will just about wrap up the water project, and then we'll switch over and start working on the cabin stuff. It looks like we're gonna be demolishing the existing cabin before we do any of the other work because the permitting process is taking some time. And so, I'm spending a lot of time in front of a computer. We're waiting on engineers, we're waiting on plans and some other things. So as soon as we get all that stuff into the county, then we'll wait for a permit. But in that period, while we're waiting for the permit, we can demolish the cabin and prepare so that we've got a spot to put in our foundations and start repeating these steps at a bigger scale and hopefully with a little bit more experience. So thanks for watching. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. Until I see you next, I'll be out building. Take care.